Hello, agentpreneurs, and welcome to the Daily List Report. I'm Randy Shiozaki. I am your host. I'm also one of the founders of ListReports, a great free tool for real estate agents. So if you don't use it, we have 300,000 agents across the country using it to up their game in marketing and social media. Go to listreports.com and you can sign up for free. Also, while you're here, if you like the content on this channel, please consider subscribing, like this video, comment, tell us what we can be doing better. I'm really excited actually for today's show. We've got Vanessa Sestina back on. Vanessa Sestina, if I go back here to episode 25, this is her second appearance on this show. She did a great show. We called it How to Get Back Up When the World Knocks You Down. I think it was very, very timely content, and I can't wait for our discussion today. Also, VanessaSestina.com. So she's a coach and consultant. You know, I love this sort of lead line on her website. It says lead with purpose. So she's a positive psychology practitioner, coach. She does workshops, consulting, and honestly, she's just a super delightful person. Really excited for that. So today we're going to talk about the science of motivation, and we talk a lot about motivation on this show, and it's hard to get motivated, especially right now. There's a lot of things coming at us, and I've had a lot of guests on the show who, you know, let's say Jocko Willink, for example, who just gets in your face and he's like, get after it, right? And other people, and there's, as we've talked about, different people resonate with different people, right? And so there's different styles and approaches that work for you. What we're going to talk about today, what Vanessa's going to talk about, is really the science behind this. And I think this is a really interesting and important topic so that you understand sort of the root cause of some of this motivation and how you can sort of get that and sort of where it comes from. So I'm going to stop talking. As usual, I talk too much. I'm going to bring Vanessa on. Vanessa, say hello again to the agentpreneurs of ListReports.
Hey, agentpreneurs. It is so good to be back on the show. Thank you, Randy. I'm really honored to be here, and it's just such a joy on my end. So some of you may have seen me before if you caught the episode on resilience, but for those of you who are seeing me for the first time, I'm a coach and consultant, as Randy mentioned. I work with individuals, leaders, and businesses, and I really try to help them identify what they want to change and then co-create a process to get them there. My professional background before that has really been in employee engagement and internal communications. And I worked in that space for about 15 years or so. And I switched careers to follow my own dreams of making an impact on people more directly, and also to better support my lifestyle as a mom with 2 young kids. And I live with chronic illnesses as well, which has been a big part of my own personal journey. So being my own boss and also being empowered to create my version of work-life balance was really important to me. And my approach to coaching and consulting, as Randy mentioned, is rooted in positive psychology. That term gets thrown around quite a lot. Some people are familiar with it, some people aren't, but what it really means, the basics, it's about the science of human thriving. It's about how to increase well-being, and the shift is really focusing and starting with what's good instead of focusing on weaknesses. So we all have strengths, and to start with that and build on top of that, basically. So a big part of this is motivation. How can we harness that fire within ourselves to move toward what we really want in life? Especially right now, the context with, we've been all working and some of us living in a totally different environment and landscape than we found ourselves just 6 or so short months ago. So motivation is important to just keep us going, fuel ourselves every day to go after what we really want in life.
Absolutely. Vanessa, thank you for that introduction. I feel like I could have had you on this show every single day for the last 6 months, and I think that everybody out there would get a lot from this. And I'm encouraging all of you who are watching right now to consider please sharing this episode, because this is such an important and critical topic, and there are a lot of people that are suffering right now. I talked with George Raitu, who's the senior economist at Realtor.com, and what he was talking about, Vanessa, is there's been a lot of talk about the nature of the recovery. Is it a V-shaped recovery, U-shaped recovery? And that's as it relates to the economy. And he described it in another way, right, which is as a K-shaped recovery. And that makes a lot of sense, right, which is there are those of us who are still on this sort of upward trajectory, and we feel very lucky and fortunate and blessed to be there. And there are those who are on the downward trend, and they're really suffering right now. So it's just, these messages are important. And my hope always for this show, Vanessa, is that these messages are able to be delivered to the broadest and widest audience possible because it's so important. But why don't we just go ahead and jump in? I know you have this great presentation here, so I'm going to take a step back for a moment, and I'm going to let you talk. Thanks, Vanessa.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. So if we can go to the next slide. Today, we're going to start with some motivation basics, what it is and how it works. Then we're going to dive a little deeper into some different types of motivation. Not all motivation, it's not just a one size fits all. There are different types of motivation, and we can look at how they influence our behavior in different ways. And then finally, this is what I'm here to do, which is to go over some simple everyday tips on how you can maximize motivation in your life. And on the next slide here.
Real quick, Vanessa, I just want to make one real quick point, which is we're going to make these slides available. So for those of you, you can take your notes, right? But we're going to make these slides available, and then Vanessa's going to talk about this great worksheet as she did last time that she put together, so you can actually put some of this into practice. So sorry, I just want to jump in with that real quick, Vanessa.
Yeah, awesome. That's great. Yeah. So looking at here, what is motivation? Something I found interesting is the words motivation and emotion share the same Latin root, which means to move. So at its core, motivation is all about inspiring us to act, right? So that can be an inner desire from within ourselves, or it can be from an outer socially driven desire or influence. And motivation is essential to really a full range of human behavior, from really deeply rooted and basic survival mechanisms like finding food to higher level things like personal goals and growth. And that's, one of the many joys of being human is we can have access to these really deeply rooted systems from a biological standpoint and leverage that to benefit and plus our lives. So it's important to keep in context, too, that motivation doesn't act alone. It might provide that initial desire to do something, but we really need to follow through on that with willpower, dedication, commitment, and action. So the next slide here. One thing about motivation is it really stops and starts with us, right? It's literally all in our head. And we can often think of motivation as this elusive thing that pops up and we can access, kind of like a puffy cloud floating by. But really, it's accessible to us at any time. And on one hand, that can be really encouraging to know and really empowering. And on the other hand, it can be kind of daunting because, the buck stops with us. But the cool thing is the motivational processes in place that influence our survival can also be tapped to help us move from surviving to thriving with fulfillment, achievement, meaning, and purpose. And I think that's just a really beautiful thing. And so here, looking at the brain basics on the next slide here, I'm not a neuroscientist, and this is a really incredibly complex area of study, but I think it's also helpful to just have basic knowledge and an understanding of what's happening to the brain when it comes to things like motivation. So this is just a very basic high-level view. Many of you have heard of the neurotransmitter dopamine. It's a chemical produced in the brain that plays a major role in motivation. And it spurs us towards seeking that initial reward to pursue something either good or avoid something bad. And dopamine is connected to many, many behaviors, including learning, motivation, and movement, as well as some other things like addiction and processing pain and many other things. So it's a really complex neurotransmitter. And the two main areas of the brain where dopamine is produced are in a region of the brain called the midbrain. And researchers have found that from there, dopamine travels to different pathways of the brain, including the prefrontal cortex, which is where more executive functioning, higher order thinking happens. And it also travels to the limbic system, which is in a different part of the brain, responsible for more deeply rooted things like mood and emotion, among other things. And researchers at Vanderbilt University found that while enhancing our brain's dopamine, it can have positive effects on motivation. The effects can also vary depending on where dopamine is increased in the brain. And another thing to know is that with repetition, predictability, etc., dopamine release wanes over time. So maybe we're getting the same reward. Like if we perform a certain way, we get a bonus, for instance. And if that happens, every month for a year, that bonus might not have the same effect over time, might not release the same levels of dopamine. But dopamine spikes with novelty and unpredictability. So because of this, dopamine plays a role in that initial motivation for the reward. But it's important to just really take those moments to celebrate and to savor our successes, to find that true fulfillment and happiness that's more sustainable, to help us continue to be motivated instead of just seeking the next dopamine rush.
Vanessa, let me just interject here for a second, just an
Sure.
observation and a point I want to make, right? Which is, I try my best on this show to make sure that people understand not just sort of the symptom, but the cause, I guess is one way to put it, right? To sort of dive to the underlying things. And that's some of what you're talking about here. But what's interesting about this whole topic of motivation, for me at least, is that it's something that feels very emotional, and yet it's rooted in deep science, right? And
Right.
dopamine triggers and all of these things. I just think there's an interesting relationship between the two that I think most people, even if they understand on some level, don't deeply appreciate. And that when you talk about sort of hacking your psychology, and I don't know if that's a term that you hate or use, right? But
Yeah.
what you just said is really important, which is we can all relate to these moments where we get that hit, that rush when something is new and it's fresh and it's different. And then the next day it feels not quite as cool or as special, and the next day a little bit less, and then we fall back into our own ways. And so I'm curious, as this conversation unfolds and as we have this conversation, to understand that a little bit better as to how we can sort of not necessarily engineer that hit all of the time to the same degree, but to your point, how we can sort of savor that moment, savor that win, appreciate that hit, and use it to sort of carry us forward. So just wanted to interject that real quick.
Yeah, absolutely. And you bring an important point, right? It's about understanding so many different things that are happening and knowing when to kind of rev up what in what given moment. So depending on, the goal, what we're trying to do, and then perhaps the challenges that we might be having as individuals moving toward that goal. So there's a lot there. And, I do hope that I address some of that in the presentation. And then like if there are specific questions that are unanswered, burning
Absolutely.
questions, I'd love to revisit that.
Indeed.
Um, Awesome. Yeah. And so to look at the next slide, which is those 4 types of motivation, there are lots of different schools of thought around motivation. And here I just tried to synthesize some 4 really, really basic types of motivation here. So at the top, we see approach motivation and avoidance motivation. An approach motivation moves us toward a positive reward. Avoidance motivation moves us away from something negative or something that could harm us to keep us safe. And at the bottom here, we have intrinsic motivation, which is an internal motivation from within. This is really about doing the behavior for the sake of itself. The reward is what you're doing. And extrinsic motivation is based on rewards or consequences from others. And at the bottom here, research shows that intrinsic motivation, that internal motivation, is more effective and more powerful. It taps into our sense of meaning and purpose, as well as our own level of competency by using our strengths and our skills toward accomplishing a goal. And all of these types of motivation have a place in our lives. We're motivated by deadlines. We're motivated by a raise. We're motivated by doing something that makes a difference in somebody else's life. And like what we were talking about before, the key is to know what type of motivation you're working with in that moment, and to maximize that in the context of what you're trying to achieve.
Vanessa, just a
Yeah.
quick question. I'm sorry. As we look at intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation, um, do they have the same results? Are they equally as powerful, or is one better than the other?
Yeah, I mean, I hesitate to use the term better.
Of course.
They're different. But when it comes to intrinsic, that internal motivation, there's more of a sustainable level of motivation. So the extrinsic motivation, kind of like the dopamine, it wanes over time. It can actually end up demotivating people if you're having that external reward over and over again, and we don't have a sense of that internal sense of motivation to move towards something. It can actually cause a disconnect where we don't feel motivated anymore. From my standpoint, the internal motivation is really important to call up, and to really get a sense of that meaning and purpose, which in my opinion, it's always there. It's always there. If we can take a step back and look at the bigger picture and look at how what we're working on is connected to something larger, which we'll talk a little bit about more later, but that's really a way that you can manufacture, if you will, or tap into that internal sense of motivation, even if what you're working on is really external.
Let me ask you a question, and if I'm jumping the gun, feel free to tell me to
Sure.
slow down.
No, we can move around. Yeah.
So I just want to make sure people understand the distinction between these two things. So let me characterize them in one way. You tell me if I'm on track or not. Right?
Okay.
So
Yeah.
I have a regular guest on the show. His name is Eric Mitchell. He has a book coming out, and he talks a lot about motivation as one of his topics. And when I think about intrinsic motivation as opposed to extrinsic motivation, here's an example of that your intrinsic motivation can come rooted in an external source. And let me give you an example. So the way that he describes it is, you say, I want to be the best real estate agent in the country, right? And I want to do it for myself, right? And you have all of your reasons, and that's very intrinsic. But for some people, it's like, I'm going to do it for my children, or I'm going to do it for my spouse, or I'm going to do it for my parents, right? Whatever that might be. That feels to me like an intrinsic motivation that is derived from an external source, as opposed to what I think maybe extrinsic motivation might be, which is, hey, if I do X, Y, and Z, I'm going to get a raise, right? And that's a very explicit external motivation that is sort of temporal in nature, doesn't last forever. Or I'm in a competition, a diet competition, and there's $1,000 prize, so I'm going to lose this weight to win the $1,000 prize, but it doesn't sustain. Is that a fair characterization, that an intrinsic motivation can actually be derived from an external source?
Yeah, and I love the examples that you used of, for my kids or for my spouse, et cetera. And what I would say is, if you dig deeper, even underneath that, I would say there actually is an internal motivation behind that, which is, I want to be a good role model for my kids, or, I want to be, a good spouse, or that my spouse can really look at me and say, hey, I'm proud of you, or you're really reaching your goals. But there's always that sense of like, what's motivating you from within yourself. So it gets it's complicated and it's dynamic, but if we dig deeper and deeper and deeper, I believe that internal sense of motivation can be kind of like fleshed out, and really defined. And that just takes it to a different level.
That makes sense. Okay, awesome. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I love it. I love these conversations. And just one more point too about the intrinsic and extrinsic. Research shows that internal motivation, it leads to higher quality output, and the extrinsic motivation can lead to higher quantity. So if we have to, okay, we got to get out these reports, a bunch of things, that external motivator can be more beneficial. But that higher quality, where we really take pride in our work and we're doing our best work, that internal motivation is more connected to that.
That makes sense.
Awesome. Okay, so moving on to the next slide here. We're just going to break down a few tips and through the lens of the different types of motivation here. So moving toward new behavior is more effective than trying to stop old behavior. So there are a couple of things to remember here. One is, sometimes people need to replace their old behavior with something new and move toward that. And the other piece is, the brain doesn't really compute negative words like not or don't. So if we are, trying not to eat so much sugar, right? And there's a piece of cake in the fridge, that's your favorite piece of cake. If we're saying in our heads, don't eat the cake over and over again, what our brain hears is eat the cake, or it's just thinking about that cake, right?
So interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that can make it more difficult to actually not do the thing that we're trying to avoid because we're calling it up in our own brains and we're strengthening and activating those neural pathways about the cake, which immediately we might start salivating or just thinking about how delicious it would be. um, so here for the first tip is to really try to flip it to the positive opposite, right? So for example, if we're trying to go to bed earlier at night, instead of, I don't want to stay up so late at night, I'm feeling exhausted next day, I don't want to stay up so late, to flip it to, I want to get enough rest at night and feel refreshed when I wake up. So just that shift can really help us have a different level of motivation, a deeper sense of motivation to move toward a positive behavior there. And the second tip here is to visualize yourself succeeding. A lot of people talk about visualization. To be frank, it took me quite a bit to get on board with visualization because it just has an air of you know uh, more woo woo than like my comfort level is, right? And then when I
Yes.
started looking into the science around motivation or visualization, pardon me, it's not necessarily like turning on some yoga music and visualizing this beautiful serene place, which has its place, right? But this is getting really concrete and visualizing yourself succeeding to really not only think about what that would be, but to embody the feeling of what is it going to be like when I succeed and accomplish this goal. And what that does is it helps fire up the dopamine in the right regions of the brain, right? We were talked about how dopamine is not only connected to motivation and some positive things, it's also connected to, pain avoidance and addiction and things like that. So if we're putting in the effort to visualize ourselves succeeding and accomplishing this goal, it can really help us lay down the pathways for that motivation, and also get really specific to see yourself at the end before you even take the steps to begin, and just savor that feeling of what is it going to be like to have that sense of accomplishment. And the third tip here is to what I call share it out loud. So create accountability by telling somebody what you're working on. When our goals just live in our head, we don't necessarily have that sense of accountability. So when we tell, our spouse, our friend, a family member, a neighbor, et cetera, or even just sharing something on social media, whatever works for you, that helps move the goal from just living inside your head to something that's more tangible and a very real thing that you'll be more likely to take steps toward, and have somebody who can help keep you on track and on path with that. And so the next slide here is looking at intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. So external rewards, we talked about how those can really demotivate over time and they lose their effectiveness. And with internal motivation, it's more powerful and sustainable, like we talked about, even for an external goal. So the key is to tap into that sense of meaning and purpose, as well as using our strengths to move forward in that goal. So the first tip here is to connect to the bigger picture, which we talked about a little bit. So even if the goal is external, to take that step back and think about how your specific role, or how this piece, this goal, will connect to the bigger picture. How will it improve, something bigger, whether it be at work or in your personal life, but how will it impact others in a positive way? And the second tip here is to balance skill and challenge to better get in the zone, to help keep anxiety and boredom at bay. This is also known as flow, a flow state, which there could be a whole presentation on just that. But to
I
boil it
bet.
down, yeah, it's really interesting science around it. But what it means is, so if you look at skill and challenge, they need to be in balance, right, in order to just be in that zone. So if the skill level is too high and the challenge is too low, we can end up being bored or apathetic, right? It's easy for us to do. If the skill is low and the challenge is high, then we can feel stressed out or anxious. So some things here, some tips here. If the skill is high and the challenge is low, you could think of a totally new and different way to approach accomplishing the goal. Or some people like to kind of gamify, what they're working on, either set a deadline for yourself that's even earlier than the last time you accomplished it, or just switch up and change up how you approach this goal. If the opposite is happening, if the challenge is high and the skill is low, it really depends on the situation, but to just really be realistic about what you can accomplish, the time that it's going to take to accomplish that, and to be okay asking for help or support in building skills in that area, or accessing resources that could help you better achieve that goal. And then, yeah.
Vanessa, let me just ask you a quick question, if I could.
Absolutely.
You're right. When people hear, not people, some people hear things like positive psychology, it sounds like you said a bit foo-foo or woohoo or whatever the word is that you use, right?
Yeah.
But it is deeply rooted in science as well, which I think is one of the great parts of this presentation in particular. One of the things that I talk a lot about internally, like to my teams, is this idea of reframing, right? So reframing a problem. And I guess at its heart, is that what positive psychology is? So the example that I think is often given is, instead of saying I have to go to work, you say I get to go to work, just as one small example. And that really reframes how you think about it, which is, my goodness, I'm lucky. Maybe I'm on the upper part of the K as opposed to the lower part of the K during the times that we're in now. And those small things, those words matter. And that reframing, I've seen it time and time again, is such an incredibly powerful thing. Is that really the root of what positive psychology is, in part at least?
In part, yeah, I think absolutely. That's a big part of it. I mean, it seems simple, right? But you're tapping into and accessing so much, because you are, from a biological standpoint and a physiological standpoint, shifting your emotional connection to whatever it is that you're doing, that I get to. It's almost like I can feel myself being pulled toward that thing, versus saying, I have to, where you just feel literally, weighed down and negative, right?
Yeah.
So there's that piece. And then it's also about shifting mindset, as you said. There's fixed mindset and there's growth mindset. And fixed mindset is just really limiting, and growth mindset is just expansive, where we can achieve more things. So absolutely, that's a big piece of it. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, Vanessa.
Yeah, absolutely. And here we're at the third tip here, I think, which is focusing on our strengths instead of weaknesses, which we talked a little bit about also. But we all are here, and we have unique strengths and talent to enhance any given situation, which can help boost that sense of intrinsic motivation. So if we're good at something in particular, or if we really enjoy doing something in particular, to really apply those skills to what we're working on. And I'm an advocate for really speaking up as well, whether it's in our home life or our work life, et cetera. If there's something that you're really good at, to see if you can grow that area in your professional or personal life. With me and my spouse, we talk about things that we like doing around the house, or are, just neutral about, or that we really don't like. And, it seems like we each have too many things that we, that we don't like, and we work on that. But it's really wonderful to operate in your sphere where you feel like you're leveraging your own strengths. And here too, to just reflect on similar accomplishments from the past. If you're working on a project or a goal, whether it's personal development or in your professional life, to just think about, was there something similar that I accomplished in the past? What did I specifically bring to the table? How can I really apply those specific strengths again to the situation now? And then moving on to the next slide here, these are just the main takeaways. That motivation it's ancient and it's brain-based, from survival on a really basic level to self-improvement. And it's a biologically based system that we can leverage to improve our lives and go after what we want. The fact that we have the choice, where perhaps, your house cat might not have the choice, is just an amazing thing about being human. And it's something that is just never ending, right? We can always tap into that when we want to. And that internal positive goals are the most effective. So we want to try to move toward a new behavior instead of moving away from something. And we want to fire up that internal motivation. To connect to the bigger picture for a meaningful boost, that's a way to do that, to activate our sense of meaning and purpose. And finally, that motivation is really up to you, and that it's accessible to us at any time, which I hope is empowering and not daunting, but that's really a wonderful thing.
That is, I think, one of my favorite things about it, right? Which is that
Yeah,
it's not it's not way out there, it's right here, right? Like you can change that mindset, you can reframe your thinking, and you can do that now, like literally right now, right? And that's something that I
absolutely.
think is so exciting about it. What's scary about it is because it's so accessible in theory, it's also easy to lose. And I think that's what a lot of people struggle with is the loss of motivation. We can all recount moments where we've felt this great sense of motivation to accomplish something and take on the world. But we can also remember, probably more so,
Yeah.
the times that we've lost it.
Absolutely. I think that's a lot of pressure, right? To just call that up and that it's accessible at any time. That can just be almost scary, that it's
It
up
is
to us.
scary.
And I think, we all find ourselves having a hard time accessing motivation or even feeling demotivated at a time. And I think it's important to take a break if you can at that point in time and go get inspired, whatever that means to you. Go pull up, your favorite TED talk, or go for a walk,
Mm-hmm.
or, snuggle with your pets, or
Mm-hmm.
get your kids to giggle with you, or whatever it is. But if we just remove ourselves from this gridlock of just not being able to move forward on a goal, investing in that time to just replenish our happiness reserves can just be really helpful to go back to whatever you're working on with that positive fuel.
Couldn't agree more. That's awesome.
Awesome. Yeah. Um, and here, ending with this quote, I love this quote. It's like a little bit of humor to the situation. And people often say that motivation doesn't last. Well, neither does bathing. That's why we recommend it daily.
That's great. I
And
love
that's
that.
by, yeah, I love it too. And it's Zig Ziglar is a motivational speaker, and I just feel like it's we do need to replenish those reserves, like we were talking about, and whatever motivates you. It could be, your favorite song. It could be really simple things, but just to weave those things into your life, so you're kind of priming yourself to go after something, from that mindset, from that positive place, can be really powerful.
Well, let me make one other quick point here, which is that this is a really important point, and I'm sure people understand it intellectually, if nothing else, but I don't think people practice this enough, right? But this is the reason behind. For those who go to church, this is what church does, right? It's this realignment and motivation around that. Or people who meditate daily. This is a good source of that. One thing that I look at is I've for years I looked at professional athletes who are at the top of their game, and I'm like, man, they have coaches. Like, why do they need a coach? They know more about this than anybody. And I think I concluded that a big part of that is just that continual motivation. Obviously, they're working on various things, but I guess the point is we all need a coach, right? We all need this reminder. And I love this quote because it's so important, because it's something that we need to do daily. And whether those are words of affirmation in front of a mirror, or this is a meditation or a prayer, or whatever works for you, right? Making
Mhm.
this a daily habit, I think, to stay aligned is something that's critically important.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And the ways that we do that can be so simple and easy. And it's
Mm-hmm.
just really identifying what can we fold into our lives that we can commit to. We talked about that way back when in the resilience talk. I'm really passionate about just honing in on what's sustainable that I can put into my life that helps fuel me and light me up, and not having our goals for motivating ourselves be so big that we just don't do them because we feel overwhelmed. That's not helping us. So I think just finding those small things and just really committing to them, sticking to
Mm-hmm.
them, whether it's putting primers up all around your walls or your bathroom mirror, or reminders in your phone, or certain triggers throughout your routine, like waking up in the morning or whatever it might be. But just not starting necessarily so big, or that you got to do X, Y, meditate and
Exactly.
exercise and get sunshine and do this, but just start with one thing And when that one thing, when we're consistently doing that, right, over a period of a couple weeks, then we can layer on something else and do the same thing and see how that's working for us.
Well, Vanessa, it's the theory beyond the scope of this conversation, but maybe another conversation behind habit stacking, right? Which is
Absolutely.
you don't say, I'm going to go run 8 miles in the morning. You say, I'm going to wake up and put my feet on the floor. And then once my
Yep.
feet are on the floor, I'm going to put my shoes on, things like that.
Yep.
So habit stacking, I think, is a really great way to accomplish that.
Absolutely. And just to connect that to motivation and that reward pathway, with dopamine, when we say, okay, I'm going to wake up and I'm going to put my shoes on and put my feet on the floor, and we do that, boom, we get that hit. I did what I committed to. I did what I said I was going to do. That's a really good feeling, right?
It is.
And then
It
that
is.
does help motivate toward the next step, which is
Absolutely.
great.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome.
So where do you want to go next, Vanessa? Let's talk a little bit about how to work with you. I want to make sure people understand. I love your approach and your demeanor, and I don't know, I just love all of this stuff. So let's talk a little bit about how people can work with you.
Sure. Yeah, I do have a couple spots open right now for one-on-one coaching that can really help motivate individuals and create that sense of accountability. Um, People are welcome to check out my website and learn more about me. And there's a contact me page where you can click on that and let me know if you're interested. I ask people to commit to 3 to 5 sessions because that's just really will help us make some movement, in someone's life. So coaching is really great if somebody's working on a specific goal that they want to achieve, or if they want to make a shift, in their behavior or their mindset, like we've been talking about. And then I do offer strengths-based coaching, which is a bit more of a structured journey. There are different strengths assessments where, to identify somebody's strengths and then look at how to apply that in their daily life for greater life satisfaction or even a specific project or area of their life. So if people are interested, they can contact me. And, I know with the situation right now, depending on where people are on that K-shape, like you were talking about, I'm passionate about making coaching accessible to people. And I do offer sliding scale for those who truly need it. So just know that that's always available as well. So yeah, I just am passionate about supporting people, and coaching is a wonderful way to do that.
That's wonderful, Vanessa. Thank you for doing that. I think it's amazing that you're in a position where you're able to provide your services to those in need. Based on a need basis, right? But that's
Right.
that's really great. And just real quick, right? So everybody, VanessaSestina.com is where you can get more information. We'll have links below. Vanessa, I do want to talk for a moment here about this worksheet. So you have your Science of
Yes.
Motivation goal worksheet. I have it up on
Yeah.
screen. We will link to this as well. So why don't you talk a little bit about what this worksheet is?
Absolutely. Yeah. So this can be used in tandem with the presentation. It's, a simple one sheet here that can help break down a goal. So it's really, really looking specifically at more goal planning, but it ties to some of the themes that we were talking about. So people can identify what goal they're working on, really write down and get clear on what the why is behind that goal, to tap into the meaning and purpose and the bigger picture here. Another thing too that's part of the worksheet is to write down, what would it cost me or others if I didn't reach my goal. That can be a really powerful sense of motivation too, to think through, like, what if this didn't happen? And writing down, who or what can hold me accountable. Thinking before you even start on your goal, how would you want to celebrate your successes? That can be really beneficial and powerful as well. And then breaking the goal down into different milestones. So this is a simple goal planning worksheet that hits on some of the key points from the presentation as well.
Fantastic. All right. Oops, I got my cameras messed up here. Now we're back. Perfect.
All right.
Well, Vanessa, I think that's it for today. Thank you so much for taking the time to go through this. It's just a really critical topic, and I think a lot of people, pretty much everybody struggles with this from time to time. This is a universal thing, but I think in particular right now, the times are challenging enough where this is probably even felt, I think, more acutely than it might normally be.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'll say, my final words here is just to really give yourself some grace. I think that's important too, and to know how much grace to give so that you'll come back and
Yes.
actually execute on it. But just we need to be compassionate to ourselves too. This is unprecedented what we're going through, and so just be kind to yourself.
Absolutely. Thank you, Vanessa, for doing this. And I think, frankly, your journey will resonate with a lot of our agents out there because, like you said, you made this shift in your career and this choice for personal reasons, for your family, for health, for all of that. It's very empowering. You wanted to be your own CEO. And I think that's a lot of agents get into the business for the exact same reasons, right? Because they want to be able to, take their kids to school or whatever the reasons are. They all, I think, stem from this idea of empowerment. And I think that that's a lot of what you cover, and that's pretty great. Well, Vanessa, that's it for today. I hope we can have you back on again soon. I think there's a lot that we can talk about. I can't believe it's been 40 minutes already, if you can believe it. But there's a lot of ground to cover, and this is really great content. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Take care. Bye.
Okay, we'll talk to you soon, Vanessa. All right. Well, there you have it. Oh, almost. There you have it. Really appreciate Vanessa taking time to come on the show today and talk about the science behind motivation. It's such a critically important topic. Again, we have all of the links below. Make sure you check out her website. Download this presentation, get the worksheet, and get to work at this. This is something that you can do right now, today. We'll definitely have her back on. Maybe we can talk a little bit about habit stacking. That's something I'm a big fan of, and I think it's a really important topic because it makes it very practical, sort of how you put these things into play. But as a foundation, this is great because you get a sense for sort of the science that underpins all of this, and understanding that there is science behind it, I think, is a critical point because it's not just emotions and how I feel. It's actually deeply rooted, and in my mind, it's also something that can be engineered, right? So a lot of the tips that she gave are ways to really engineer those sort of scientific reactions that happen inside of our body and in our brains that helps us to accomplish the things that we want. So they're intimately related, those two things. All right, well, that's it for today. So until tomorrow, be safe, be healthy, be happy, and get motivated. We'll see you soon. Bye.